The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people had looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. Now, in the year 2347, they finally knew the answer. The universe was full of life. It was full of alien civilizations that had existed for millions of years. And compared to them, humanity was nothing special. Captain stood on the bridge of her ship, the Perseverance, and stared at the endless darkness ahead. Her vessel was small. By the standards of the galaxy, it was barely more than a shuttle. The great alien empires had ships that stretched for kilometers. They had technology that humans could barely understand. When humanity had first made contact with the conclave of united species, the aliens had welcomed them with polite smiles and gentle words. But knew the truth. The aliens looked at humans the way adults look at small children. They were patient. They were kind, but they did not take humanity seriously. "Captain," said Lieutenant Commander from his station, "we are approaching the edge of the Helix Expanse." Nodded slowly. The Helix Expanse was a region of space that the Conclave had marked as empty and worthless. No alien species had visited it in 3 million years. There was nothing there, they said, just dead stars and empty void. But had a feeling. She had learned to trust her feelings over the years. "Take us in," she ordered, nice and slow. The Perseverance moved forward into the darkness. The crew of 40 worked at their stations in silence. They were explorers, all of them. They had signed up for this mission because they wanted to find something new. Something that would prove humanity was more than just the youngest and weakest species in the galaxy. Hours passed. The sensors showed nothing but empty space. Was about to give the order to turn back when suddenly sat up straight in his chair. "Captain," he said, his voice strange, "I am picking up something ahead. It is. I do not understand what I am seeing." Walked over to his station and looked at the screen. At first, she did not understand either. The readings made no sense. They showed objects ahead, but the size was wrong. The computer must be broken. "That cannot be right," she said. "Those readings suggest objects the size of small moons." "I have checked 3 times," replied. "The readings are accurate." Felt her heart begin to beat faster. She turned to the main, put it on visual. The screen flickered, and then saw something that would change the history of humanity forever. Ships, 12 enormous ships, arranged in a perfect circle around a dying red star. Each one was the size of Earth's moon. Their hulls were black as night, covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. They were impossible. "What are those things?" whispered Dr. Sarah, the ship's linguist. She had come to the bridge when the alert sounded. Now she stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. "I do not know," said, "but we are going to find out." She ordered the Perseverance to move closer. As they approached, the sensors picked up more details. The ships were old, incredibly old. They had been floating here for billions of years. But they were not dead. Deep inside each vessel, there was a faint energy signature. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. "They are sleeping," said Chief Engineer. "These ships are in some kind of hibernation mode." Made a decision. She knew it was against every rule and regulation. She knew the Conclave had warned humanity never to touch alien technology they did not understand. But something deep inside her said that this was important. This was what humanity had been searching for. "Prepare a shuttle," she ordered. "I am going aboard." The shuttle crossed the void between the Perseverance and the nearest giant ship. Led a team of 10, including Sarah and... As they approached, a section of the hull simply opened for them. It was as if the ship knew they were coming. Inside, the scale was beyond anything had ever experienced. The corridors were hundreds of meters wide. The ceilings stretched so high that they disappeared into darkness. Everything was built for beings that stood 30 meters tall. Humans were like ants walking through a palace built for giants. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed. "The symbols on the walls, they are unlike any language in the Conclave's database. This civilization must have existed before any current species evolved." They walked for what felt like hours, following a path that seemed to light up before them. Finally, they reached a massive chamber at the heart of the ship. In the center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal was a small interface panel. It was the only thing in the entire ship that was built for human-sized hands. Approached it slowly. The panel was covered in dust that had accumulated over eons. She reached out and touched it. The panel lit up instantly. A warm light scanned her hand, her face, her entire body. Then a voice spoke in her mind. It was not sound. It was pure thought transmitted directly into her brain. DNA match confirmed. Descendants of the architects detected. Welcome home, children. We have waited so long. Stumbled backward in shock. All around the chamber, lights began to turn on. The heartbeat pulse of the ship grew stronger, faster. Through the walls, she could feel the other 11 ships beginning to wake up as well. Captain said, his voice shaking, "What is happening?" Looked at her crew. She looked at the ancient chamber around them. She thought about humanity struggling to prove itself to a galaxy that did not care, and she began to understand. "These ships," she said slowly, "they were waiting for us, specifically for us, for humans." The voice spoke in her mind again. "The architects seeded your world 4 billion years ago. They created you. They loved you, and they left us here to wait for the day you would return to claim your inheritance. The long sleep ends now." Outside, in the cold void of space, the 12 Titan ships blazed to life. Their running lights cut through the darkness like new stars being born. The energy they released was so powerful that it was detected by sensors across the entire galaxy. On 100 different worlds, alien scientists looked at their readings and felt the cold grip of fear. Something ancient had awakened. Something that had been sleeping since before their civilizations existed. And it had awakened for humanity. Stood in the heart of a ship larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and she smiled. The aliens had looked down on humans for so long. They had treated humanity like children. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every major civilization knew what had happened in the Helix expanse. The youngest species in the conclave had found something ancient and powerful, and it had responded only to them. Ambassador of the was the first to demand answers. There were beings made of living crystal, beautiful and cold. They had ruled galactic politics for 800,000 years. They were not used to surprises. "This is unacceptable," declared before the Conclave High Council. His crystalline body pulsed with angry light. "These vessels must be quarantined immediately. Humanity must hand over all data and all access. They are too young and too foolish to be trusted with such power." The other species murmured in agreement. They clicked their mandibles nervously. The syndicate merchants whispered among themselves. Even species that had been friendly to humanity now looked at the human ambassador with suspicion and fear. Earth's response was simple and clear: no. The United Nations Space Command had already sent a fleet to secure the Helix expanse. Scientists from every nation on Earth were traveling to study the ships. Humanity had found these vessels. Humanity had awakened them, and humanity would not give them up. The next 6 months were chaos. The Conclave threatened to cut off all trade with Earth. They threatened to blockade the Sol system. Some species even spoke of military action, but humanity did not back down. Instead, they worked. Captain led the research teams aboard the largest vessel, which they had named Prometheus. Dr. Sarah spent endless hours studying the strange symbols, trying to crack the language of the architects. Chief Engineer mapped the ship's power systems and nearly fainted when she understood what she was looking at. "These engines," told one day, her hands trembling, "they do not just move through space, they fold it. They can travel anywhere in the galaxy in moments. And the power source, it is drawing energy directly from another dimension. It is unlimited." The weapons were even more terrifying. Each Titan ship carried devices that could crack planets open like eggs. They had shields that could survive the explosion of a star. A single one of these vessels was more powerful than all the fleets of the Conclave combined. But it was Sarah who made the most important discovery. After months of work, she finally cracked the architect language. She learned how to communicate with the ship's ancient intelligence, and she learned the truth about where humans came from. "The architects were the first great civilization in this galaxy," she explained to the assembled leaders of Earth. "They existed billions of years ago before any current species evolved. They explored the stars, they built wonders, and they seeded life on thousands of worlds." She paused, her voice shaking with emotion. "Earth was one of those worlds. The architects created the conditions for life on our planet. They guided our evolution. We are not just a random species that developed by chance. We are their children, their descendants, their heirs." The room was silent. Everyone understood what this meant. Humanity was not the youngest species in the galaxy. They were the oldest. The other civilizations had simply evolved later in a galaxy that the architects had shaped. 1 month later, stood on the bridge of the Prometheus as the ship fully activated for the first time. She had been chosen to command this vessel, to be the voice of humanity among the stars. Around her, human crew members worked alongside holographic displays that responded to their thoughts. The ship's AI spoke in her mind. It called itself the Keeper, and it had been waiting for this moment for 4 billion years. Prometheus is fully operational, the Keeper said. All systems are active, weapons are armed, engines are ready. What are your orders, Captain? Looked at the far in the distance, she could see the Conclave observation fleet. 50 alien warships had been sent to monitor the situation. In reality, they were there to intimidate humanity, to remind them of their place. Take us out, ordered. Let them see us. The Prometheus moved forward. She was so large that she made the alien warships look like insects. Her hull gleamed with ancient power. Her weapons' ports glowed with barely contained energy. The alien commanders watched in stunned silence as this impossible vessel passed by them. Behind the Prometheus, the other 11 Titan ships followed. They moved in perfect formation, like a pack of predators emerging from their den. Each one was a moon-sized monument to a civilization that had mastered the universe while the current species were still single-celled organisms. Ambassador's message to the Conclave High Council was broadcast on an open channel, so everyone in the galaxy could hear. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was afraid. The humans have warships, he said. Warships beyond anything we have ever seen, beyond anything we ever imagined possible. We need to talk, now. But was wrong. These were not warships. The Keeper explained this to as they traveled toward Earth. The architects did not build us for conquest, the ancient AI said. We are arcs, siege ships, colony vessels. We were designed to carry the architect civilization across the stars to spread life and knowledge everywhere we went. The weapons are for defense only. Then why did the architects leave? Asked. Why did they abandon these ships and disappear? The Keeper was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something like sadness in its voice. That information is restricted until you reach the architect, but I can tell you this, Captain. The architects did not leave by choice. They were driven away, and the threat that drove them away, it is still out there, waiting. Felt a chill run down her spine. She looked out at the stars, suddenly seeing the darkness between them in a new way. The galaxy was vast and old, and humanity had only just begun to understand how much they did not know. But they had the Titan ships now. They had the legacy of the architects. And whatever was out there, whatever had threatened the greatest civilization in history, humanity would face it. They had no other choice. The Prometheus arrived in the Sol system to a hero's welcome. Billions of people across Earth watched as the massive vessel took its place in orbit around their planet. For the first time in history, humanity felt truly powerful, truly significant. The galaxy had looked down on them for so long, had treated them like children playing at being adults. Now the children had inherited their parents' house, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Fear is a powerful thing. It can make friends into enemies. It can turn peace into war. And when the galaxy learned that humanity was connected to the architects, fear spread like a disease through every civilization. The architects were not just an ancient species. They were legends. They were myths. Every civilization in the galaxy had stories about them passed down through millions of years. The architects had shaped the galaxy itself. They had moved stars. They had created life. They had been like gods. And now their children had returned, carrying weapons that could destroy worlds. Admiral James stood before the United Nations Security Council and tried to explain the situation. He was an old soldier, a man who had spent his life protecting Earth. Now he commanded the newly formed architect fleet, 12 Titan ships crewed by humans who were still learning what their vessels could do. We do not want war, he said firmly. These ships were not built for conquest. They were built to protect and to explore, but we must be prepared. The galaxy is afraid of us and fear makes people do terrible things. He was right to be worried. The Dominion was a civilization of warriors. They had built their empire through conquest and violence. For 300,000 years, they had been one of the most feared powers in the galaxy. And now they saw humanity as a threat that must be destroyed before it grew too strong. The humans are weak, declared the Supreme Commander before his war council. They have only held these ships for a few months. They do not understand their power. We must strike now while they are still learning. We must wipe them out before they become unstoppable. They began to gather their forces. 3,000 warships, the largest fleet they had ever assembled. Each ship was crewed by warriors who had trained their entire lives for combat. Each ship was equipped with the best weapons technology could produce. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy watched and waited. The conclave officially called for peace, but they did nothing to stop the. Many secretly hoped the warriors would succeed. Better to eliminate humanity now than to live in fear of them forever. Admiral learned of the coming attack through intelligence reports. He had two choices. He could try to negotiate to convince them to stand down, or he could prepare for battle. He chose both. "We will send a message to the Supreme Commander," he told his officers. "We will offer peace, we will offer trade, we will offer friendship. But while we talk, we will prepare to fight, because if they do not listen to words, they will listen to action." The peace offer was rejected. The Supreme Commander laughed at the human ambassador and told him that Earth would burn within a week. The fleet launched toward the Sol system, traveling at maximum speed. The galaxy held its breath. When the Armada arrived at the edge of the Sol system, they found the 12 Titan ships waiting for them. The human vessels hung in space like sleeping giants, their ancient hulls dark against the stars. Behind them, Earth glowed blue and green, filled with 8 billion people who were counting on their protectors. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Prometheus. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency. They had trained for this moment. They were ready. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Give them one last chance." His voice echoed across the void to the fleet. "This is Admiral James of the United Nations Space Command. You are entering human territory with hostile intent. Turn back now and there will be no conflict. Continue forward and you will be destroyed. This is your only warning." The Supreme Commander responded with a single word: fire. 3,000 warships opened up with everything they had. Missiles streaked through space. Energy beams cut through the darkness. Enough firepower to crack a continent was directed at the human vessels. It did nothing. The shields of the Titan ships absorbed the attack like water absorbing drops of rain. The ancient architect technology did not even flicker. Admiral watched the display screen with a heavy heart. He had hoped it would not come to this. "All ships," he said quietly, "return fire." What happened next was not a battle, it was a demonstration. The Prometheus fired a single shot from its main weapon. A beam of pure white light crossed the distance between the ships in an instant. When it struck the flagship, the massive warship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there. The next, it was an expanding cloud of plasma. The other Titan ships joined in. Their weapons were precise and devastating. They targeted engines, weapons systems, command centers. Warships exploded one after another. The warriors tried to fight back, tried to retreat, tried to do anything to survive. But they were facing technology that was billions of years more advanced than their own. 11 minutes. That was how long it took. 11 minutes to destroy 3,000 warships. 11 minutes to shatter the greatest military force they had ever assembled. When it was over, Admiral broadcast a message to the survivors. His voice was not triumphant. It was sad. "We did not want this," he said. "We offered peace. You chose war. Let this be a lesson to the entire galaxy. Humanity will never be conquered. We will never be enslaved. We will never be destroyed. But we do not seek to conquer others. We do not wish to rule. Leave us in peace and we will leave you in peace. Attack us and you will face the same fate as this fleet." The message was received on every planet in the galaxy. Billions of beings watched recordings of the battle. They saw the Armada, the most powerful military force in known space, reduced to debris in less than a quarter of an hour. Ambassador of the watched the recording 3 times. Each time his crystalline body grew dimmer with fear. He had thought the Titan ships were powerful. He had not understood just how powerful. "We cannot fight them," he said to the Conclave High Council. "We cannot threaten them. We cannot control them. If humanity wanted to conquer the galaxy, they could do it in a month. We would be helpless to stop them." "Then what do we do?" asked another ambassador. Was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke the words that every species in the galaxy was beginning to understand. "We hope they are as peaceful as they claim to be, because if they are not, we are all already dead." Far away, admirals stared out at the stars and thought about what humanity had become. They had wanted respect. They had wanted to be taken seriously. Now they had power beyond imagination. The question was, what would they do with it? Victory brought problems that no one had expected. The destruction of the Armada had proven humanity's power, but it had also made them the most feared species in the galaxy. Fear does not lead to friendship. It leads to desperation. In the months after the battle, Admiral dealt with a constant stream of threats and attacks. Assassins tried to poison human diplomats. Saboteurs attempted to damage the Titan ships. Spies infiltrated Earth's research facilities. Every species in the galaxy seemed determined to find a weakness, any weakness, in humanity's newfound power. The Conclave itself was breaking apart. Half the member species wanted to form an alliance with humanity. They believed it was better to be friends with the strongest power than to be their enemy. The other half wanted to unite against the humans. They argued that no single species should have so much power. They said humanity would eventually use their ships to enslave everyone. Captain, now promoted to Admiral, had little time for politics. She was focused on a more important mission. The Keeper had told her that answers waited at the Architect. She needed to find it. She needed to understand why the Architects had left and what threat had driven them away. The journey took 3 months, even with the Titan ship's incredible speed. Commanded the Odyssey, traveling deep into the Helix expanse with a crew of 500 humans and a few alien scientists who had volunteered to join them. Dr. Sarah was there, still studying the Architect language. Chief Engineer came too, eager to learn more about the ancient technology. What they found at the heart of the expanse took their breath away. The Architect was not a planet. It was an artificial structure that encircled a black hole. The ring was millions of kilometers in diameter, with a surface area greater than 1,000 Earths. Cities covered every part of it, beautiful structures of crystal and light that had stood empty for 4 billion years. "This is impossible," whispered as the Odyssey approached. "The engineering required to build something like this, the resources, the knowledge, it is beyond anything I ever imagined." The ship landed in what appeared to be a central plaza, led a team into the abandoned city, walking through streets that had once held billions of architects. Now there was only silence and dust. It was like walking through a graveyard the size of a solar system. They found the archive at the center of the ring. It was a building that stretched to the artificial sky, filled with holographic records of the entire architect civilization. When touched the interface, the Keeper connected to the archive's database. Suddenly, she had access to everything, the complete history of the beings who had created humanity. The architects had not been gods. They had been dreamers and explorers, just like humans. They had risen from a small world billions of years ago. They had learned to travel among the stars. They had built wonders that current civilizations could barely understand. And they had been kind. They seeded life across the galaxy because they wanted the universe to be full of beauty and intelligence. But they had made a mistake. In their exploration of the universe, they had ventured beyond the edge of the galaxy. And there, in the vast, empty space between galaxies, they had found something old, something hungry, something that had existed since the beginning of time itself. The architects called it the Silence. The Silence was not a species in any normal sense. It was more like a force of nature, a hunger that consumed everything it touched. It had already devoured 1,000 galaxies, stripping them of all life, all energy, all meaning. When it found the Milky Way, it began to feed. The architects fought back. They were the most advanced civilization in history. They had technology that could move stars and create life. They threw everything they had against the Silence. They lost. Watched the recordings with tears in her eyes. She saw architect fleets destroyed by the millions. She saw planets consumed, their populations screaming as the darkness took them. She saw the greatest civilization ever to exist brought to its knees by an enemy it could not defeat. In the end, the surviving architects made a desperate choice. They could not destroy the Silence, but they could slow it down. They sacrificed themselves to wound the enemy to force it into a long recovery, and before they died, they hid their greatest treasures, their seed ships, their knowledge, their children on 100 different worlds. Earth was one of those worlds. Humanity was one of those children. They knew, said slowly, understanding finally dawning. They knew that someday the Silence would recover. They knew it would come back, and they left us the Titan ships not as weapons of conquest, but as our only chance to survive. The Keeper confirmed her understanding. The architects calculated that the Silence would need approximately 4 billion years to recover from its wounds. They seeded Earth at exactly the right time so that humanity would evolve and develop just as the threat returned. You were always meant to be their successors, their final hope. "How long do we have?" asked, "before the silence arrives?" "Based on current calculations," the keeper replied, "the silence will reach the edge of the galaxy in approximately 3 to 5 years. Felt the weight of this knowledge settle on her shoulders. For months, humanity had been arguing with the Conclave about power and politics. They had been fighting assassination attempts and dealing with fear and suspicion. And all that time, a threat that had destroyed the architects was moving toward them. None of the petty conflicts mattered. None of the fear and distrust mattered. If the silence arrived and found the galaxy divided and fighting among itself, everyone would die. Every species, every civilization, every living thing. Humanity had not inherited the Titan ships to become rulers of the galaxy. They had inherited them to become its protectors, its defenders, its last line of defense against an enemy that had never been stopped. Stood in the archive of the architects and made a decision. She would return to Earth. She would tell the galaxy the truth. And then she would do something that had never been done before. She would unite every species, every civilization, every living being under a single banner, not through conquest, not through fear, but through shared purpose, through the understanding that they all faced the same enemy. The architects had failed because they fought alone. Humanity would not make the same mistake. "Prepare the ship for departure," ordered. "We have work to do and not much time to do it." The countdown to the end of everything had begun. The truth about the silence changed everything. When Admiral stood before the Conclave Grand Assembly and showed them the recordings from the architect, the room fell into complete silence. Every ambassador, every representative, every leader watched the ancient images of the architect's final battle. They saw the most powerful civilization in history torn apart by darkness. And they understood. Ambassador of the was the first to speak. His crystalline body pulsed with light, but it was not the angry glow of their previous meetings. It was something softer, something humbler. "We were fools," he said. "We spent months arguing about power and control while death moved toward us. We feared humanity because of their strength when we should have been grateful for it. The architects gave them the Titan ships for a reason, to protect all of us." One by one, the other species joined him. The Dominion, humbled by their defeat but not broken, offered their remaining warriors. The syndicate of merchant princes opened their vast wealth to fund the war effort. Even species that had called for humanity's destruction now stood alongside them. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was truly united. The next 3 years were a storm of activity. Dr. Sarah worked with architect technology to create translation systems that allowed different species to work together perfectly. Chief Engineer designed hybrid ships, combining the best of galactic technology with ancient architect engineering. Training camps were established across 100 worlds, where warriors from every species learned to fight side by side. The 12 Titan ships became the heart of the United Fleet. Each one was crewed by a mixed team of humans and aliens. Navigators used their crystalline minds to enhance sensor systems. Warriors provided security and combat expertise. Scientists from dozens of species studied every system, looking for any advantage against the coming enemy. Admiral commanded from the bridge of the Prometheus. At 70 years old, she had silver in her hair and lines on her face. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, and her voice still carried the authority of someone who had seen the impossible and refused to back down. The silence arrived on a cold morning in March. It came from the void between galaxies, a wave of absolute darkness that swallowed the light of stars. Ships that were not ships, beings that were not beings. It was hunger given form, emptiness with purpose. It had consumed 1,000 galaxies, and it had never been stopped. The United Fleet met it at the threshold, the point where the galaxy ended and the void began. 10,000 ships from every species in known space, arranged behind the 12 Titan vessels like an army behind its champions. Looked at the tactical display and felt fear touch her heart. The silence was vast. It stretched across light years, a darkness so complete that it seemed to suck the hope from everyone who looked at it. The architects, with all their power, had failed against this enemy. But the architects had fought alone. "All ships," said, her voice broadcast to every vessel in the fleet. "This is Admiral. The enemy before us destroyed the greatest civilization in history. It has consumed more life than we can imagine. Today, we will either stop it or we will die trying. There is no retreat. There is no surrender. There is only victory or extinction. She paused, looking at her crew. Humans and aliens stood together on the bridge, their different faces united by the same determination. But we have something the architects did not have. We have each other. Every species in the galaxy stands together today. Every civilization, every culture, every living being who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. We are not just fighting for our own survival. We are fighting for the future of all life everywhere. She straightened her uniform and gave the order that would change history forever. All ships attack. The battle that followed was the most terrible and the most glorious event in galactic history. The Titan ships led the charge, their ancient weapons blazing against the darkness. Behind them, 10,000 vessels from every species poured fire into the silence. The enemy fought back. Tendrils of darkness reached out and consumed ships by the hundreds. Warriors from a dozen species died in moments, their vessels torn apart by forces beyond understanding. The silence was strong. It was ancient. It was hungry. But it had never faced a united galaxy before. The Prometheus took the point of the attack, driving deeper into the darkness than any other ship. Commanded from the bridge as reality twisted around them. The Keeper's voice echoed in her mind, guiding her through the chaos. There, the ancient AI said, the center of the silence, that is where you must strike. Use the connection to the black hole at the galaxy's heart. Channel its power through all 12 Titan ships simultaneously. Understood what the Keeper was asking. It was a desperate move, one that the architects had never attempted. All 12 Titan ships would have to work in perfect harmony. They would have to channel more energy than any weapon in history. All Titan ships, she commanded. Synchronize with Prometheus. Prepare for coordinated fire on my mark. The 12 great vessels moved into position, forming a perfect circle at the heart of the battle. Energy flowed between them, linking their systems into a single massive weapon. Behind them, the alien fleets held the line, buying precious seconds with their lives. Now said, the Titan ships fired as one. A beam of light erupted from the center of their formation, so bright that it was visible across the entire galaxy. It was not just energy. It was the accumulated power of a black hole, focused and directed by technology billions of years old. It struck the center of the silence with the force of a dying star. The silence screamed. It was a sound that echoed in every mind, on every world, in every corner of the galaxy. A cry of pain and rage from an entity that had never felt such things before. And then it was gone. The darkness broke apart, scattered into the void like shadows before sunrise. The hunger that had consumed 1,000 galaxies was finally ended. In the aftermath, the united fleet gathered among the stars. Ships from every species floated together, their crews celebrating a victory that none had thought possible. Messages of joy and gratitude flowed across every communication channel. Admiral stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus and watched as representatives from 100 worlds gathered to plan the future. The Titan ships would become seeds for new civilizations, their ancient technology shared freely with all who wanted it. The united fleet would become a permanent force for peace, crewed by beings from every species. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy, they had saved it, and in saving it they had found their true purpose. A young officer with crystals still dark from youth approached with wonder in his eyes. "Admiral," he asked, "what happens now?" Smiled, thinking of all the years ahead, the exploration, the discovery, the endless possibilities of a galaxy at peace. "Now," she said, "we do what the architects always wanted their children to do. We reach for the stars, not because they belong to us, but because they belong to everyone. We protect. We explore, we dream." She looked out at the gathered ships, at the beings from so many different worlds working together as one. The galaxy looked at humanity and saw something to fear. Then they saw something to hope for. Now they see what we really are. "What is that?" the young asked. Smile grew wider. "Family, all of us, every species, every world. We are the children of the stars, and together there is nothing we cannot achieve." Outside, the stars shone bright against the darkness, no longer afraid. The silence was gone. The galaxy was united. And humanity, the youngest and oldest of all species, had finally found their place among the stars. Not as conquerors, not as rulers. as guardians, as dreamers, as hope. The story of the architects had ended 4 billion years ago. The story of their children was just beginning.